U.S. History 2, Chapter 3, Section 4, Farming in the West. So, the Homestead Act of 1862. The U.S. government offered a free 160-acre plot of land in the Great Plains to anyone who resided on the land for at least 5 years. So the government did this. They wanted to help poor people have a career for themselves and give them land out on the Great Plains. They had this great expanse of land, give them some land, make a home and a career for themselves, and be successful. Homesteaders were the name of the settlers that accepted the U.S. government's offer. So you can see here, this is kind of advertisement for it. This is the Great Plains. This is kind of where all the land was given away at. Oklahoma, Texas, Nebraska, Kansas. That's considered the Great Plains. So the Homestead Act was not a success. 160 acres was not enough land to be very profitable on the Great Plains. You need kind of a lot of land on the Great Plains to get any kind of strong yield, since you don't get a lot of yield off of an acre like you would in the East. Only 1 out of every 3 farmers lasted the full 5 years on the Great Plains. As you can see in the picture, it's tough living. So railroads promoted farming on the Great Plains as well. As we discussed in the previous chapter, the Transcontinental Railroad and tributaries of the Transcontinental Railroad, were growing. They wanted people to move out there so they can use the railroads more. So more farms meant more shipping of crops on the railroads. And the railroad companies that owned great areas of land on the Great Plains would give thousands of acres to farmers so they could use the railroad to ship their crops east. It's kind of like, you help me, I help you, you help me kind of a thing. And the railroad companies would also recruit immigrants from other countries to settle on the Great Plains to start a new life. They just need people out there so they can use their new railroads to ship things. So life on the Great Plains was not easy. Water was scarce. Crops were hard to grow because of the lack of water and this really hard soil. If it's not raining a lot, the soil becomes pretty hard. A lot of the soil on the Great Plains was covered in sod, and sod is a thick top layer of soil that had roots and grass entangled in the dirt. It's really hard, compact, and you had to bust it up before you start farming. And it was hard busting this up, and it'd break a lot of plows doing it. But you had to reach that fertile soil. But these Great Plains settlers, they were innovative, and they had what they used this sod after they busted it up is that they used it to build their houses out of. On the Great Plains, there's not a lot of trees, there's not a lot of lumber to build your house out of. So what they did was they would use this kind of the sod to build a house. So pretty much it's a dirt house. It's but the dirt is so thick it's almost like clay, so it's almost like bricks, and that's what they built their house out of. They were solid, they were cool in the summer and warm in the winter months, so well insulated. It's kind of a picture of a sod house. It pretty much looks like block, but when you look at it, it's actually compacted dirt. So water for the settlers was deep under the ground and needed to be pumped out. Windmills were used to pump out the water from the ground. Farmers put up fences to keep animals from escaping. Like I said before, there wasn't a lot of lumber out there. There wasn't a lot of trees. So farmers, invented, Joseph Glidden invented the barbed wire fence, which is a metal fence with a barb on it to keep animals from roaming off, instead of wooden fences. So this is an example of barbed wire here, and it's still used today. And quite sharp to touch it, but it definitely kept animals in. So this is kind of how a windmill works. You have the turbine that turns with, the paddles turn with the wind, and it pumps out the water into this storage tank. By the late 1880s, most of the land of the Great Plains was occupied. People rushed there to get those 160 acres. It was free, and they started farming out there. In 1889, though, the government opened up the Indian Territory of Oklahoma. Before, this territory was protected as Native American land, and then the United States figured they could make money off of this land. Americans should be on this land. They pretty much kicked out the Native Americans. They wanted to give it to American settlers. So people who rushed in to get a piece of this land, it was nice land in Oklahoma, they were called boomers. So some people illegally staked their claim on the land before it was officially open to settlers. And they were called Sooners. So pretty much this is how it happened. They opened up the land on this one day, and all these people literally ran out and were there to stake their claim on certain plots of land. Kind of an ineffective way to do it. You think there'd be some kind of waiting list, but this is literally how they did it. Everybody just started running and to stake out a piece of land. Kind of crazy. But, Oklahoma University and, Oklahoma State itself, they're called the Sooner State. And it was named after those people that kind of legally snuck in and, before it was actually open and state claimed on their land. They were like, they're like almost hiding behind a rock. And as soon as it opened, they're like, this is, our land. It's like, how did you get there so early? So they're kind of like illegally did it. But it's kind of a joke now, but they were called Sooners. So with the massive increase in farming on the Great Plains, there was a great increase in grain being produced. Wheat, corn, oats, etc. So that affected the supply and demand. When there's an increase in supply, the demand decreases. There was too many farmers that were making too much corn or making too much wheat, and the demand just wasn't there. It was too much food. And when the demand decreases, the price decreases. So if you can't sell it, you have to sell it cheaper so maybe someone will buy it. And since there was a surplus, there was just too much grain, the demand decreased and the price decreased. So the price decreased at such a rate that the farmers were not making any profit on their farm, and they couldn't pay their debts. It was bad times. So farmers began working together to help each other out in these difficult times. Farm cooperatives were established, groups of farmers that would work together and make large purchases of machinery. They would share it so they wouldn't have to get such in debt, and they could help each other out if they were faced hard times. But these unhappy farmers also joined the members of the labor unions to form a new political party, the Populist Party. This Populist Party goal was to push for new social reforms. The farmers thought they needed more representation in the government. People who were farmers or laborers were a part of this party. And populists wanted inflation. Inflation is the rising prices of goods. They thought that if the prices of grains rose, they would be able to pay back their loans and they would make more money off of the grain. Populists also wanted the American dollar to be backed by the silver dollar since there was more silver than gold. And that's the whole, United States Reserve. It's kind of a complicated process, but pretty much paper money needs to be backed by something that's actually valuable. Like a dollar bill, it's made up of paper, so it's not actually worth anything. So it needs to be backed by something, gold. The United States has to have gold to back it up. But the American dollar, the populists wanted the American dollar to be backed by silver since there was more of it, and so the dollar would technically be worth more. And the United States had more silver than gold. So the presidential election of 1896, Democrat William Jennings Bryan was a favorite among the populist ideas, wanted silver and gold to back U.S. money, not just gold. Republican William McKinley favored only gold to back the United States money. He didn't want that rapid inflation. The majority of Americans, especially those that lived in the cities, did not care for the problems of farmers. If you think of high population, they live in cities, they're industrial at this time, and they didn't really care for the problems of farmers. So most of the people voted for William McKinley, and he won the presidency in 1896. So the plight of the farmers, it kind of ended there. With the Populist Party, and even to this day, our money's only backed by gold, even though the United States doesn't have as much gold as we need to back all the paper money out there. But that's okay. We have a strong military, and people just kind of have to respect that. But anyways, that concludes chapter 3.